Hello, everybody, and welcome. Oh, I froze for a second there, I think. Hello, everyone. Welcome. Before we begin, I just wanted to acknowledge that we're meeting on unceded Aboriginal land today. Obviously, we're all spread out, but I'm on the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. Welcome to today's webinar, Lead with Impact, Lead More, Do Less. This is the fourth in our Leading with Impact series. So today we're going to explore how leaders make the transition from doing, in being technical experts in completing tasks, to leading that looks more like guiding or supporting other people to do the work. Why is this transition important? It empowers decision-making in teams, builds capability, creates clarity, builds engagement and satisfaction, facilitates scalability within a business, and importantly for you as leaders, it creates space for the tasks that only you can do. We're going to start by looking at shifting some of the technical expert beliefs that you may have held, so that, I have to do the work, to a leadership belief, which is I have to lead somebody else to do the work. Now, in order to do that successfully, there's a really fundamental skill required, and that's delegation. So that's the next thing that we're going to talk about, delegation as a leadership skill rather than task management. So those of you who've gone to our webinars or workshops before will know we very often start with this question of what does good leadership look like, or who's the best manager you ever had? And the answers to that question create some pretty good fodder, I think, for these kinds of conversations. I've asked that question in hundreds of workshops over the last 7 years. And the answers provide great insight, I think, into people's experience of being managed. Where those answers become particularly relevant to today's webinar is that in all of the years of asking people, who's your best manager, or what does good management look like? No one has ever said, my best manager was a great technical expert. No one has ever said, my manager had all of the answers. Rather, they talk about leaders who gave them autonomy, who considered their development, or who supported them with skills and resources to do their jobs and then got out of the way. A little bit about John and I, and who we are and how we look at things. Shannon, I'm a psychosocial risk consultant, and I tend to think about the workplace as a system. So what I mean when I say that is how the design and management of work impacts the health and well-being of employees. I'm facilitating today's workshop with John. John is a leadership coach and a consultant with 20 years of executive leadership experience. So John and I together bring different perspectives about how we think about leadership and the role that it plays within the workplace. But we share a common view that leadership is a human, and should be a human endeavour. And also key to this and all of the work we do, that leaders are made, not born. So, we can always do things to improve leadership and to think about being more effective leaders. A couple of housekeeping things today. We don't have any slides, so if you're looking for them and you can't find them, that's why. We like these conversations to be conversational. We will share a resource following the webinar that sets out the key things that we're going to talk about, includes some reflection exercises or thoughts for you. And we're also recording today's webinar, so we'll share that resource and that recording over the next week. We will make time for questions at the end, so feel free to drop them in throughout the presentation or throughout the webinar as you think of them. As always, these webinars are high level. We'll have opportunities for you to reflect throughout, but if you would like to explore further, or if you would like some help in thinking about how what we're saying applies either for your work or within your environment, we'll also pop our contact details in at the end, and feel free to reach out and chat to us about that.
Great, welcome everyone. So when we were thinking about sort of today's webinar, we were thinking about really how it impacts people across the lifespan of their careers. Depending on where you are in your career, the balance of technical work to leadership is going to be different. If you're newer to leadership, the likelihood is that your role may have a greater technical load. If you're very senior, it's more likely that your role will be predominantly leadership. And wherever we are on that spectrum, and acknowledging that there is a balance between technical work and leadership, it's really important for us to build awareness of when we need to be working from a technical position and when we need to be working with a leadership lens. What can often happen, though, is that leaders find themselves operating from the technical, even when the work that needs to be done is asking for leadership.
Mm-hmm. I think sometimes that happens, and is understandable. Usually that's because the beliefs that have powered people through their careers and have often been the foundation for their earlier success, right? So they've served them well as individual contributors, but those beliefs can stay in place. Unfortunately, they're usually beliefs that aren't designed for leadership. They're designed for somebody whose job is to produce the work themselves rather than to build the capability of a team who can do the work. So I think John's going to step us through them in a moment, but as he's doing that, similar to earlier webinars, it's probably a really good idea to look for yourself in some of the things that John's talking about. If some of those beliefs feel familiar or they resonate with you, if you can see yourself in them, just hold on to that information because it's something that you can do something with. That insight into that recognition can lead you to some really helpful actions moving forward.
Cool. Yeah, so I think, when I work with leaders, there are probably 3 common beliefs that keep cropping up. And I think it might be useful just to step through those. So the first one is, for people who might be known as the safe pair of hands, they're the person who's across things and makes sure that they get done well. Probably you've seen what happens when things go wrong and you want to make sure that they don't. You might well be operating from the belief that if I'm not across it, it'll go wrong. But when we apply that belief and we're leading people, suddenly we're in other people's work. We're involving ourselves where we don't belong. We're checking everything always, not just the high stakes work. What can help us as leaders is to change that belief to something more like, my job is to build a team I trust so that I don't need to be across everything. Our second common belief, might be related to the sort of person who always gets things done. The person who exceeds their KPIs, meets every deadline, drives projects to completion. You pride yourself on being responsive, agile, able to turn things around quickly, and you've been acknowledged and rewarded for it. And if that's you, your belief might be something like, I get rewarded for getting things done, so things have to happen right now. And that's all well and good when you are a technical expert or an individual contributor. But as a leader, that can look like constantly shifting priorities, and for your team, an experience of chaotic, constantly shifting work. You can still get rewarded for getting things done, but a more helpful belief as a leader is, I'm rewarded for what my team gets done, and I need to develop them to prioritize and do the work. Third belief relates to people who typically are genuinely excellent at the technical work. They come to their job with a great deal of a depth of knowledge and a skill that exceeds other people's. And they probably get real satisfaction and pride from doing the work. If that's the case, the belief that's operating there might be something like, I'm the only one who can get this right. But when you're in a leadership role, that can turn into not handing work over to your team, or thinking it's just faster if I do it myself, or being chronically dissatisfied with the standard of work that they serve back to you. As a leader, a more helpful belief looks like there's more than one way to get this right, and my job is to define what right means and support others to produce it. So those are sort of three common beliefs that I see. I think it's worth saying, though, that these beliefs can show up at any point in your career. I've worked with leaders who are trying to figure out what leadership is to them, who are really grappling with what the work of leadership actually is, who hang on to their old work because it feels more real or more familiar or more tangible. I've worked with senior leaders who come to me feeling overwhelmed by the amount of work they're trying to manage, who are still trying to do other people's work as well as their own, largely because they want to be sure it meets the standard that they expect. Wherever you are on that spectrum, both of those people are in a position where they need to let go of things. They need to let go of their old identity or their old role or their sense of control, and step into a new way of leading.
I think, we see this all the time, this idea of, and it's neither good nor bad, it just is that sort of safety blanket, either when we're trying a new thing, holding on to what's new or familiar or tangible can feel safe and known. So, you're testing and you're stretching, then to go back on something where you feel less vulnerable is understandable. So there's no judgment about it. It's just something that's a really good idea to have insight into, so that when you notice it, you are able to then shift to more effective leadership.
That's right. I think, just reflecting on one of the other things I've noticed, with leaders I work with, when they come to me, many conversations I have start with them talking about their busyness or feeling overwhelmed, or having no time in their calendar to do their real work. And often the conversation starts with, can I have strategies to manage my time more effectively? Where the conversation often ends is a much deeper but more transformative place where we start to talk about, well, what's driving me to be like this? Now, that's not simple work, and it can't really be done quickly, but it involves spending time working out what your beliefs are. And remember, our beliefs are often unconscious. So then we need to unpack what we see and experience that confirms that belief day in, day out, and what you think might be at risk if you try to change. When we've done all that, we adapt the belief so that it suits who you want to be as a leader. And this is the important step. We then start to create small experiments where you can try to prove to yourself that working in this new way is safe and productive. Of course, it's not a linear process. People make progress and then they fall back a little bit. We're programmed to hold on to the beliefs that we have. So they do keep re-emerging. So a critical part of what we need to do when we're doing this is actually do things differently and consciously accumulate new evidence to support how we want to lead.
Yeah, so it's that building in practical opportunities to challenge your own assumptions, so that insight comes first. Like, I absolutely recognize myself in a couple of those beliefs, then think, oh, here it is again. That's right. That's that thought. I'm going to observe it, and then I'm going to try and look for opportunities to challenge. Now, one of the ways that you can do that is, and to help, I guess, shift that belief that other people can do the work and do it well, is through effective delegation. And that is something that you can do immediately. Now, delegation done poorly can feel like it's about task management. Done well, it's actually about leadership. Now, what I mean when I say that is, in order to delegate effectively, you have to know people, you have to know what they're good at, you have to know where they might need development. It'll be really important to have a strategic lens. And so sure those of you who've attended our webinars in the past this is a sort of a familiar idea, this kind of know your team, that knowing your team is the common thread through our messaging. So investing time, investing effort, investing resources into the people that you're managing is actually the foundation for effective leadership generally. I mean, it's absolutely the foundation for delegating effectively. So let's think about delegation. It requires time. So when we're talking about time, we're thinking about for the work to get done and critically for the work to be improved if necessary.
Yeah.
It requires support to build capability in the teams that you're leading, and it requires clarity around what it is that you want. So if we think about time and support first, in order to set yourself up and the other person up for success, what you want to do is to match the task to the person, to the time available, and the level of support that you can provide. So a really good early questions to ask yourself is, can the person I'm giving this to do the job in the time available? Hence, you have to know your people. If something is high stakes, has a close deadline, is mission critical, or if you have very rigid ideas about what something must look like, you can only really effectively delegate that to somebody who has proven capability, or you have to do it yourself. However, notice in that situation, you've really not allowed sufficient time to delegate or to provide the support. You might be up against a deadline, or perhaps you believe I'm the only person who can do it, has to be done in a certain way to be right. If that's getting in the way, that might need to be attended to before you can start delegating confidently. So that's time and support. Now maybe we can think about clarity.
I love thinking about clarity. So when we're talking about clarity, we might, I think, also be talking about completeness. So how do I tell the person everything they need to know the first time so that I don't have to field clarifying questions, or worse still, leave the person guessing or interpreting what they think I meant, or ultimately having to redo the work myself because it's so far removed from what I need. So personally, I am a big fan of the CPQQRT framework that was developed by organizational psychologist Elliot Jaques, Canadian. Now, admittedly, that is not the catchiest acronym, but it's a great way to ensure completeness. I'm going to unpack that for you now, and we will make sure that it's included in the resource that we send out. So CPQQRT. C is for context. So what is the bigger picture? What's driving what you're asking the person to do? Really think about this as an opportunity to zoom out a little bit, because the person that you're giving the task to just might not be aware of the broader context because they don't have the perspective that you do as a leader. So for example, this can be as simple as saying, our funders have asked for an urgent update, or I'm building a business case for investment in a new CRM, or our annual planning day with the board is coming up. Something that contextualizes what you're asking them to do. P is for purpose. So why does this work matter? What will the outcome of the work be? If you can let people in on the why and not just the what, generally speaking, it will shape how they respond. So for example, it might be as simple as saying, to help our funders decide whether or not to renew the grant, or to reduce the administrative burden on the team, or to showcase our achievements. Really simple, but an easy way of creating the why for people.
Thanks. Sorry, John, to interrupt. When we can be clear about purpose, it's really motivating for teams. It just feels less like, oh, here's an administrative task, or, you know, here's a task I have to do, and yeah, provides motivation, engages people with their work. And the more we can do that with work, you know, why am I doing this? Why now? What's this got to do with me? How is this contributing to organizational goals? Can be really helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And, you know, it's good to be able to weave that purpose into different aspects of our work whenever we can.
Yeah.
So let's move on to our Qs. So the first Q is for quality. So what does good look like in this instance? Now, left unsaid, some people, as you all know, will work tirelessly to produce a perfect document, but maybe all you wanted was a first draft. Or other people might just give you bullet points when actually what you wanted was a reasoned case. So think about what you want in this instance. Second Q is for quantity. So what is the scope of what you're asking for? Is it half a page? Is it a slide deck with a maximum of 12 slides? Is it actually a full report with executive summary, recommendations, and annexures?
I mean, the other benefit of this, or one of the benefits of that, is just that it's containing, you're creating an efficiency here. It might seem really obvious to you, but actually, if you can set that out really clearly for people, you're making sure people don't either underwork or overwork, as John said. There's something when John's speaking that sticks out to me in terms of it's probably particularly important if you have perfectionists in your team to make sure that people don't really over-engineer something that could potentially be simple.
Absolutely. So R, moving on to R, is for resources. So what budget, people, or other resources can people draw on to help them complete the work? Do you expect them to work alone, with other people in their team or an adjacent team, or with someone external to your organization?
I think when if other people are involved, other people being able to answer these questions is probably good as well in terms of that role
Absolutely.
clarity. If different roles are involved, everybody needs to understand what they're doing, what the boundaries, what the limitations of that specific role are.
Absolutely, that's a critical piece. And our final T is for time. So what's the final deadline for delivery, but also what are the check-in points that you're going to include in the project? So that's CPQQRT. A couple of points worth mentioning about this. Most people have a blind spot when they're handing over work. Maybe they don't talk about quality, maybe they miss out the context. If you use this framework, it can really help you identify what your blind spot typically is and help you be more consistent and complete in how you hand things over. Second thing to point out, which is absolutely critical, is that complete does not, and I want to capitalize not, mean exhaustive. When I was first introduced to this framework, I was working with a colleague who rolled his eyes in despair and asked how he was ever going to have the time to put all of that information into an email. It was going to take him longer to do that, he said, than do the job himself. Not true. You can be brief and complete. For example, it's time for us to send an update to our funder so that they can release the next payment. Context and purpose. Please send me the top 5 achievements from this quarter, ready for me to share with them. Bullet points are fine. Quality and quantity. Check in with Sam's team to see if they have anything to add to your list. Resource. Get it to me by Wednesday so I can send it off by the end of the week. Any questions or concerns, let me know as soon as possible. Time. So, critical. Complete does not mean exhaustive, but it just means covering off each of those elements to make sure that everybody knows what they need to do.
I mean, a common question for leaders, I think, is that sort of, or fear, really, is, if I loosen my grip on this, how will I know things are going to get done correctly? What we actually need to do is to untangle 2 questions in that: how things need to get done and does it meet the standard or not? So if we're thinking about how things need to get done, a couple of points throughout: agreeing on autonomy up front. So thinking about, well, should they act this independently and report back, or do they need to check in before next steps? You really want to be explicit so that neither of you is guessing about that. Don't leave that unspoken and then get frustrated when they get it wrong. So this is all around sort of bringing clarity and bringing things to the surface and sort of alleviating that sort of wondering or speculation. If you want people to report back, set check-in points. Try to avoid that open access. So you might agree on 1 or 2 moments to look at progress, with a draft at the halfway mark or a quick call before it goes external. There is a little bit of a tension, I think, that's worth acknowledging between being available and looming. That sort of looming might, be very well intended, but might be perceived as a lack of trust. So if we can set those check-in points at the beginning, that's really helpful. Another thing in thinking about the how is debriefing after rather than trying to rescue during. So if something's heading off track, try to resist stepping in the middle of a task, let people finish, and then talk about what you both do differently next time. It is obviously going to be slower, but it's far more durable in the long term. Checking for understanding. Anytime you're asking somebody to do something, you're delegating a task, you're talking about a project. When you've handed that over, checking with somebody about what did you hear out of what I said? What are you thinking that I'm asking you to do here? Are you confident? Did you have any questions? Is a really good idea. Another thing to look out for in terms of the how is just watching out for reverse delegation. And so what I mean when I say that is, you hand something over, they hit a snag, it comes straight back to your desk because it's easier for both of you in that moment. Every time that happens, what you've taught them and you is that handing things back works. So instead, if you invest the time when they come to you doing that coaching and support, you can alleviate that. So when we're thinking about the time, setting up the time and then the buffer. Try to let the first attempt be theirs, even if it's rougher than yours would be. The gap between that person's first draft and your best draft is actually where the learning happens for them. And rewriting what somebody's doing will close the gap for you, but not for them. A couple of other things in terms of that, how people notice what you trust them with. And so try to avoid keeping the interesting sort of 20% in a project. There tends to be a trap, I think, that we see with leaders thinking, well-intended, but I'll start them out on the easier stuff, and then when they're more confident, I can hand over the next piece. That can be a really valid strategy, but if that is your strategy, it's really helpful to be explicit on that and to follow through. And then the final thing in considering how is one of the really most common mistakes that people make is having an exacting image in your mind about what something needs to look like and then being disappointed when it doesn't appear. That's setting somebody up for failure and yourself for disappointment. Delegation involves giving people the space to do things in the way that they want to do them with the outcome that you've determined. So that's how things need to be done. And then if we're thinking about does it meet the standard or not, again, we'll have heard this before, providing specific, direct, meaningful feedback, exploring exactly what's problematic and what it should look like instead is important, making sure that your feedback is about the outcome and not about your preferred way of doing things. Try to avoid sort of this needs work because that's quite general. It's not super helpful. So that's specific, direct, meaningful. Now, of those things that need to change, thinking with somebody, how might you approach that next time? So in having that kind of conversation, you've got a coaching approach rather than a directing approach when things need to shift for the next time they attempt something.
Great, thanks, Shannon. We are coming to the end of our part of today's webinar. So just to recap, we have we've explored the shift from technical expert to leader. We've thought about what beliefs might be holding people in a technical position. And we've talked about the power of delegation to help you shift those beliefs and also to empower your team. We always like to end our webinars by giving people things to try out and experiment. So today There's an invitation to reflect on the beliefs that we talked about. Think about which ones resonated for you, and how that's impacting how you show up as a leader. Another invitation is to think about the CPQQRT framework. It is common for people to miss parts of that out. It's different for everyone. And maybe look back at a couple of recent requests that you have made and reflect on how complete it was, and maybe see if you have a blind spot that keeps cropping up.